This is the first video in the series where we will be learning about the Express web application framework. Now, as its name implies, Express is a JavaScript framework that is built on top of Node, was written in JavaScript, and is really a platform that provides a framework around how we can build web applications and web APIs. In other words, it provides us all the tools that we're going to need to work with in order to create a web application or web API that can effectively communicate, push and pull data across the internet as it interacts with various clients out there, whether they be mobile phones, browsers, desktop applications, pretty much anything you can think of could, across the internet, interact with an API. That includes your fridge. Now, before we dive into the details of the Express framework and how we begin using it to create those applications, because all of this happens on the internet, it's really important that we have a decent understanding of how the web works. By having this understanding, we will better be able to infer how Express works as we begin to learn about its features. In the screencast, we are going to be spending the majority of our time drawing on the screen and diagramming out how the internet works at various levels of detail. In other words, we're going to start out at a 50,000 foot level and really get a brief, high-level summary of how the internet works. And then we're going to dive into each piece of the internet and figure out how it works by adding more detail and coming down further into the details of how it works. Now, we're not really going to go super deep into how the internet works. We're going to get a medium depth in order to give us that base level of knowledge we're going to need to really understand how Express works and how all of our communication across the internet works. With that, let's go ahead and get started. We are going to be primarily using a blackboard, and I'm going to be drawing on the board as we create these diagrams and as we speak about how the internet works. To start off with, we are all really familiar with the web as depicted on the internet as a cloud. Now, I don't have a cool cloud icon, so we're going to go ahead and depict the internet as just this circle that we have right here in the middle of our page. So we're going to go ahead and mark that as the internet. We'll go ahead and place that right there. Okay, so we've got our internet. Now we should have a decent understanding when it comes to the internet, just based on our usage, that we usually have our computer right here on this side of the internet. And then on this side, we're going to have something that we're interacting with. And most of the time, it's going to end up being a server of some sort. So let's go ahead and get this down as our computer. This is our computer in our house, whether it be a laptop or a desktop. And then over here, we're going to have some form of a server. And on that server, there is most likely some kind of a web application running, which is exactly what Express is going to help us with when we dive into building applications using Express. So computer, internet, server. How this works is when we get on the internet, or we connect to the internet through our internet service provider, so our ISP like Comcast or your cable company or your telephone company, a connection between your computer and the internet is made. Now, depending upon what internet site you're going to, so www.google.com, it will then, through all the fancy work that happens inside the internet, you would then be connected to the server that sits behind that web address. And you would begin to have a conversation, that is, your computer will begin to have a conversation across the internet with the server at the other end, and then that server across the internet will be sending back the information that you've been requesting. So if we're talking about Google, then what we're going to have here is we are going to have a Google search happening, where on our computer in our browser, we enter in the term we're searching for. It'll go through the magic of the internet, hit the server, and the Google web application that sits over here on this side is going to then search its database. And so we can add a database in there really quick in order to capture it. And we're going to use, let's use this for a database. It's kind of a nifty shape. So this will be our database of everything on the internet, because Google pretty much seems to store everything on the internet. And so we're going to go ahead and put that right here. This is going to be the Google database, and it's going to store all that stuff. So the server is going to be communicating with its database in response to your request. The database is going to send back to the server the information that was requested. The server is going to do something on that to process that data and usually put it into some kind of a readable, legible, sortable form. And then it's going to send that request back across the magic of the internet to our computer. So this right here would be like the 10,000 foot view. We are way up and we're looking at the entire way the internet works in a very generic, very clouded perspective. In other words, we're not looking at the details of what makes a computer, or we're definitely not capturing everything that makes the internet work, nor servers or databases. So let's dive just a little bit deeper into this part, so the internet itself. And we'll just keep in mind that our computer connects to the internet, and then on the internet we have servers that we can access through domain names like www.neumont.edu. So let's dive just strictly into this, and let's get down from 100,000 feet down to more like a 50,000 foot view. And we will still show the incoming request from our computer into the web and then also from our server, but we're going to expand what happens here in the internet in more detail. So let's go ahead and add a new whiteboard. And then we are going to go ahead and let's put back on there our computer, but we're going to make it just a little tiny insignificant box over here. And we're going to use the shape that we were using before for computers so we don't get them all confused. So we're going to have our computer right here, and then we're going to have our web server. And of course, it's backed by a database most of the time, but we're not going to put that on there. And then let's go ahead and just label them really quick. We've got our computer. We're just going to call it comp. And then over here, we've got ourselves our server, the one we're trying to communicate with across the internet. And now we are going to use the rest of the space on the page to really diagram out what is happening on the internet whenever we make a request across it. So let's go ahead and make this our containing space for the internet and everything that lives inside the internet and works in order to make all of this communication happen. So we're going to show our request from our computer and then that request coming into the server. Now, as the request comes in and then the response goes back, what happens inside of here is pretty much the same, with a few details that might change depending upon the routes that the messages take. But really, what it is we have our ISP, or our Internet Service Provider. And so they are the provider of our access to the internet, whether it be your local telephone company or it be your cable company or what have you. They are going to be your gateway onto the internet. And then wherever this server lives, there's also going to be some form of internet service provider over there that provides the connection to the internet for the server. So we'll go ahead and do this really quick. Now keep in mind, this is a really high-level explanation of how the internet works. There's a lot more detail to this. All right, so let's go ahead and mark those really quick so we know what they are. We've got ourselves our ISPs. So this is an ISP, or Internet Service Provider. And then we've got ourselves an ISP over here. It is our internet, the server's internet provider, or whoever's hosting that company. Now, in between our computer, the ISP, the other ISP, and the server, we've got some magic that happens in here in order to get the request from our computer all the way over to the server, and then the response is back. And really, we're going to stick high level, like I said, and we are going to just point out the big systems on the internet that provide us the functionality and what the functionality is that they provide. Let's go with, we've got our ISP, and really that ISP is a network of its own. In other words, it has a whole bunch of computers in it that are running in it. And when we join the internet, we're actually joining the internet using their network. Same thing goes over here on the server side. The server is joining the internet by being a part of this ISP's network. So if we want to go ahead and make that super clear, our ISP, it is its own network. Right, and we'll just label that as a network. And same thing goes over here. This ISP is also its own network. Now, the crazy thing about the internet that most people don't understand is that the internet is actually a whole bunch of independent networks all over the place. So we're going to have maybe a large independent network here. Another company has a smaller network. Here's a network over here. Maybe a university or a college like Neumont has a network over here. And then we've got some networks over here. Maybe we got the government network right here. The military has a network. And they all have some form of access to what we call the internet. Well, the internet is really just a whole bunch of interconnected networks that have connections to each other. The internet's not actually owned by one particular company, and it is not owned by any specific individual. It is actually just a combination of a whole bunch of networks that all talk to each other and all provide information and services to each other. So our request is in orange, so I'm going to go ahead and display these connections between all these networks in blue. So our ISP is going to have a connection to another network. That one network is going to have a connection to some other network. Maybe this network has a connection to our ISP. This one has a connection to here. Maybe this guy has a connection over here. This one may have a connection directly to that ISP. And then we have a connection here, a connection here. Maybe this one has a connection here, as well as a direct connection to this ISP, because maybe this is Google, and Google has a ton of connections directly to other networks. So we've got all these other networks. They all have connections. Now, as we make a request across the internet, so our first request comes into our ISP's network, and then it gets routed. We call it routed because what's happening is our requests are going to follow a path across the internet. So if we go back to our orange, perhaps maybe when our initial request came through, it followed this route to this particular network. And then of course this guy has a connection here. And so it's following this particular path to the ISP over here. And maybe we've got another connection that goes right here, and then a connection that comes from this one to this one. Now our request took that route, and the route is the number of different networks that our request had to go through in order to get to the server at the end. And then once that server does what it does, and it's going to send us back a response, which we're going to go ahead and put in the color red so we can see how that path. Well, perhaps this particular route that our request came from was actually pretty busy at the time the server wanted to send its response back. So when that happens, the routers all over the internet try to look for the fastest and best path back to the requesting machine, which is our computer. And in this case, it looks like the fastest path was actually to follow this route back to our computer. And so although this request that's in orange and our response in red are, they correspond to each other. They're part of the same communication between our computer and the server. I need to make sure we get it actually back to our machine, right? From our ISP to our computer. Although they are related to each other and they're part of that communication, request and response, they don't necessarily have to go across the exact same path as the request did. And then the next time we make an additional request to the server, maybe we search for something different this time, our computer, when it makes a new request, could indeed take a completely different path this time to the server that it is requesting information from. And then again, the response could take a completely different path back. The interesting part about the internet at this view is that it's really just made up of a bunch of networks that are all interconnected to each other on this big global worldwide network. And that's what makes the internet so cool, is that no one really owns it. And so if a network over here dies or crashes, so let's say that for some odd reason, this particular network, let's go with a shape. Maybe we've got an X in here. Yeah, let's use that one right there. Let's do big red. Okay. This network right here disconnects from the internet and is no longer there, which means that all of these routes that are coming from other networks to this one would all be destroyed. Well, due to the fact that the internet is just a bunch of networks connected to one another, if this entire route goes, this one to this one to this one to this one, or around here, any of these routes, simply these other networks will begin to send all additional requests through a different pattern or a different traffic pattern, a different route, in order to get the request and the response to and from our computers. This is what makes the internet so durable and provides it the ability to respond to so many billions of requests every single day, and why it is so versatile, and why we can use it for so many different things nowadays, is because it is simple yet super complex. Now, at this point, or this particular perspective, this 50,000 foot view, we're going to go ahead and leave it at that. This is how the internet works at a very, very high level. But it's really important to understand this as we begin to build the servers over here, and we begin to interact with our clients over here, or web browsers on people's computers, and understand how the information is traversing the internet from our clients' computers to our web applications we have running on servers.